All right, CNT120, we're looking at our Chapter 6 lab. I have our lab file downloaded here as a PDF ready to go, and I have my packet tracer file downloaded here and ready to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a wireless network for like a small home office kind of thing, and this is literally the same thing we're doing in our lab room this week for the on-campus students. So I tried to make sure we have a similar connection here that we're doing. So first thing I want you to do is take a look at, we'll look at our packet tracer file here on the logical tab and see that I have kind of like a little home network set up over here. This side over here is acting as the ISP. I just have a couple servers here connected to a switch and to an ISP router. These are just here to provide us, kind of like the internet connection, if you will. Don't alter anything over here. We'll do all of our work on this side over here. If I look at our physical tab, I'm going to navigate to the home city. Here's the ISP. Here's our home building. We're kind of pretending like this is our house, and this is acting as kind of like our home office. We have a couple tables here, our desktop and some laptops, and then there's the homeowner router. So I tried to simulate this almost as like your home office, if you will. All right, so let's go back to the logical tab. The first thing we want to do is we want to connect up the ISP connection from the ISP router to our home router. We want to use the gigabit Ethernet 02 port on the ISP router. That's important. And we want to go to the internet port on the home router. So I'm going to use a crossover cable because we're dealing with router to router. So like devices, I need a crossover cable. So I'm going to click on this router here, my ISP, and I want to make sure I use the 02. That's the one configured for our network, 02. Right here, the 02 port on the ISP router. And now we're going to go to the internet port on our home router. So I'm going to click on the home router, and I'm going to go to the internet port. These gigabit ports are like the switch ports. Okay, so we want to go to the internet port there. That is now connected up. So we now have that connection there. Now let's click on the physical tab, go to the home network, and we want to connect the desktop PC to one of our LAN ports. So let's go to physical, and we probably already navigated there. There's the ISP connection coming in. We want to connect our desktop over to our homeowner router. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. So we'll use a straight through cable now to go from our desktop, and we want to go into one of the LAN ports here. And I think I tell you like port 1. It does not matter too much what we're doing, but we'll use gig 1 to keep consistent with the direction. So there's our gig 1. So our desktop PC is connected into our homeowner router, if you will. Let's look at the logical tab and see what we got going on. We'll see that we don't have any power on anything. That's because this is most likely not turned on yet. So let's go back to our physical tab, and I tell you here, once we're on the physical tab, we want to turn on the homeowner router using the power switch. So let's zoom in a little bit here. Oops. We're going to zoom in a little bit. And on the homeowner router, there's the power switch. So let's flick that, and we should see a little power light come on, and we're going to let that thing boot. Well, we literally do the same thing in our lab room. We cable it up, and then we actually apply the power to it. That way on boot up, it should be getting IP addresses from the ISP and also handing out IP addresses to our devices. So we want to make sure we're doing that. I think I tell you here to go back to the logical tab, and we want to see if we're getting link lights, and we are. We're getting there. I'll speed it up just a little bit. And we should see these settle out. Now we should be booted up and actually be able to use this. It's now powered on, ready to go. All right, so we'll go back to the physical tab. We want to locate the desktop PC, and we want to make sure the desktop PC is connected into this network, that we can use this to browse in and configure this homeowner router. Exactly what we do in our lab room as well. So we'll go back to the physical tab. I'll zoom out just a little bit. And we want to make sure this guy is configured to be able to browse into here. So I'm going to go here to its desktop. And I tell you here, we want to make sure the IP is set for dynamic. So we'll go to the IP config. Right now it's set for static, so let's do dynamic. It should pick up an IP from the router. That's a good sign. We're going to go to the command prompt. And just like we would in the lab room, I have them do IP config /release, and that releases any config it just picked up, and then we'll do renew, and that way we're absolutely positively sure we're getting the latest IP from, in this case, the router. Now, that number didn't change, and that is perfectly fine, but I wanted to make sure I was definitely getting one from the router and not some other source. Okay, so now that I have that, we are going to pay attention to the gateway address, this guy right here. That is the address of the router. So if we use that address, we should be able to ping it to communicate with it, but we should also be able to browse into that IP. Well, I want to first start with a ping 0.1 and make sure I have connectivity, which I do. So I do have connectivity in my gateway, which in this case is my router. Now that I have that working, we can move on. But if you don't, I have a couple tips here of basically power off the router, power back on, give it a minute, recycle your IP address and make sure you're picking up that IP. Same thing I do on my actual, if I bought a router and got it out of the box, this is the same process I would use. All right, well, now that I have that, I'm going to use that IP address. I'm going to browse into this access, this wireless router, this access point, if you will, to start configuring. So I'm going to open up a browser, and I'm going to browse in, log into it, and this will allow me to start configuring. And again, same thing I do in our lab room, and or if I were, helping a friend out connect up their new device. I'm going to get prompted for username and password. The default username and password for this guy is admin. If you use a different manufacturer, you might need to look up the default. Sometimes it's admin with no password. Sometimes it's just admin, that sort of thing. Look up what the default is. Once you log in, then you can change it. So I'm going to do admin, and then I'm going to do admin. Hit the enter key. This might take a second, but it'll splash up the configuration page, if you will. So I want to make this a little larger so I can see it. This would look very similar to, this actually looks very similar to the routers we have in our lab room. We have a very similar router in the lab room for the on-campus students to use. So we're using the same one here. So now that I'm browsed in, I can now start looking at the settings here and potentially make some changes. So the internet setup section I want to look at. And under the initial setup page, let's look at the internet and then our network setup and see what's here. We'll take note it's set for DHCP, so it's getting its IP from the ISP. So its IP, the router's IP here, let me go to the logical tab real quick. This IP right here is getting from the ISP. This guy is handing it an IP address, just like yours does at home. On the network side, it is saying, okay, on the inside, I'm using 192.168.0.1. So this IP address on this side is 192.168.0.1. We could change that if we wanted to, but that is a good default gateway. I'm going to leave that alone. We will also notice that it is actually set up to be a DHCP server. It's enabled. There's a DHCP server here enabled, and it hands out IP addresses to the nodes in the network. Well, let's alter that a little bit, just so you can get an idea how you would do that. I'm going to plug in the starting IP address to 192.168.0.100. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to alter that to be 100. And then I'm going to say the maximum number of users. Let's drop that down to like 50. You could make it even smaller for your home if you wanted to. And now I'm going to do a save changes on that. So I'll scroll down here. There should be a save changes. I'm going to do save changes. It might take a second for that to apply. Okay. And we potentially could even speed it up if we want to use the speed up button over there. There we go. So now it's applying that. That's fine. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to close this out. I'm going to go to my command prompt here. And what I'm going to do is do the release renew. And I should be picking up a new IP address from my router that I had just reconfigured. So IP config. I'm going to do release. And it should release that 0.2 that I got, and I want to pick up a renew. I'll pick up a new IP address with the renew. And I'm now getting 100 because I said to start handing IP addresses out at 100. There we go. So it's now using my new setting, which is pretty cool. So I can adjust that if I wanted to. So I'm still going to use the 0.1 to browse back in. So let's browse back in, pick up where we left off. Again, this is normal. You make a change, it reboots, you have to reconnect. That's fine. So I'll plug in 192, 168.0.1 again. Admin. Oops, helps if Mr. Brown types that correctly. There we go. So we'll browse back in. We'll get our splash screen again. And we'll now look at doing some wireless settings on here. All right, I'm going to pause this podcast. When I come back to the next one, we'll start doing our wireless settings.